Joly has been another tight end who's been going way under the radar this year. Ferguson is a classic jack of all trades, master of none, both in ability and where he can play in an offense. That'll definitely be enticing to NFL teams since they can plug and play him whenever and wherever they need him. That alone could get him drafted over players who could be viewed as more talented players. If he lines up inside, he's too fast for linebackers, and he's gotten better at deflecting contact with his hands to help him stay clean. And if he lines up in the slot, he's just too big and strong for corners. Hey all, and welcome to the conclusion of my mid-season ranking series. This week we'll be going through my top 15 2025 tight end rankings. Honestly, I had a lot of fun putting this list together since I feel like a lot of people are behind on tight end scouting right now, so I felt like I kept stumbling onto more and more players who aren't getting talked about enough, and more who just aren't getting talked about at all. Like the other rankings for this series, these aren't as in-depth as my final rankings, which will come out soon before the NFL draft, but I do have comps for the top 5 again. Like I mentioned, I stumbled across a lot of players who I think a lot of people should be talking about, but let me know in the comments if there's any other tight ends that you think should have gotten a shout out. Now let's finish this series and get to the rankings. As usual, we're going to start with some honorable mentions, and with the first honorable mention, we're starting with Elijah Arroyo from Miami. Arroyo has a few fans, but to be honest, I'm just not one of them. He's still just too raw and is usually most often making an impact either due to having a play drawn up for him, or the defense just forgetting about him, or if Ward just happens to find him when the play breaks down. He just doesn't have the route running to consistently create his own opportunities yet. His athleticism is nice and gives some good upsides in the future, but he just seems more of like a future type of player rather than a player who's ready to declare for the draft this year. Speaking of future player, RJ Maryland from SMU also fits that bill as an honorable mention. Maryland was actually enjoying a nice year and showing some good chemistry with Kevin Jennings before suffering a season-ending knee injury. I still have concerns about Maryland being more of a big slot and would likely benefit from returning to school for another year, but unfortunately he likely doesn't have a choice at this point due to his injury. But be sure to keep an eye on him next year to track his progression and see how he recovers from the injury. Someone who knows a thing or two about season-ending knee injuries is Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame, or my next honorable mention. I was really high on Evans coming into the year, hoping that he would come back strong from his torn ACL from last year. Unfortunately, he just doesn't look the same, and with the way he's already limited athletically, he just isn't able to contribute much in the passing game. Unfortunately, he'll almost certainly need to return to school for another year, but I think he could be a good riser for next year if he comes back healthier and stronger. Another honorable mention, and a player who's likely had a season-ending injury as well, is Bryson Nesbit from North Carolina. Nesbit's someone who I just honestly haven't been that impressed with the past few years. He's advertised as big play receiving tight end, but he just isn't able to contribute as much in the passing game due to his build, inconsistent hands, and lack of burst in his cuts to help create separation. If you're going to be a slot only or primarily a receiving tight end, you need to either be able to hold up in blocking or just be so good at pass catching that the team is willing to look past it. Unfortunately, Nesbit does neither, and it makes it hard to expect him to earn a role in the NFL, and his fractured wrist will further complicate things as he ran out of time to prove himself this season. For my final honorable mention, I have the giant Kole Taylor from West Virginia. It's pretty fitting that he's a Mountaineer standing at 6'7". I just wish Taylor played at that size. He just lets himself get way too affected by contact by much smaller defenders when he's out on his routes. For example, there was a rep I saw against Penn State when he was in the slot against a corner who's 7 inches shorter than him, and Taylor tried to run a corner route. Normally that'd be an easy win for a big target like Taylor, but unfortunately he let himself get completely jammed up and couldn't clear a contact from the smaller corner and just couldn't get out to finish his route cleanly. That's just pretty inexcusable for a tight end his size. His blocking is also disappointing since he has these long arms, but he's way too patient and will often let defenders get their hands on his pads, letting them control the point of attack. He also doesn't get enough knee bend at his size, so he isn't able to establish good leverage and just really has a hard time sticking to his block. The size is intriguing, but I just need to see a player who plays with much more urgency to be more than an honorable mention. Now getting into the rankings, at number 15 I have Jack Endries from Cal. Endries hasn't gotten much buzz this season, but there is some good potential. He has some really good hands with an impressive 88.6% reception percentage on passes to him this year, and he has some good versatility playing all over the formation, including inline, in the slot, and even in the backfield as an H-back. The versatility is nice, but the performance in these spots are still lacking at this time. In the backfield as a blocker, he's still pretty rough as a blocker and would benefit putting a little bit more weight on since he just typically doesn't get enough push in the direction he wants to, and more than often is actually the one getting pushed back. As a receiver, a fair amount of his production does come from simple out routes on rollouts, and his deeper routes are still too telegraphed and can use some work. I think he does have some potential to be a quality number 2 tight end for a team in the future, but he'll likely need to return to school for another year to refine himself. Next, number 14, I have Tanner Koziol from Ball State. Koziol will eventually get a fair amount of attention, but I think he's going to go under the radar right now since honestly a lot of people aren't watching Ball State games. But if you do watch one of their games, his towering 6'7" frame will make him very easy to notice. Outside of his height, he also has some really good hands that hold up through contact and give him a lot of upside as a red zone threat at his size. He also gives some more upside as a red zone threat thanks to his good eyes to find open space and running a diverse route tree. That being said, I still think he's a year away from being ready for the NFL, both in part due to playing at Ball State, but also due to playing at 237 pounds at his height, which really shows in his blocking when he gets pushed around against better competition. I'd also like to see him be a little bit less reliant on body catches and consistently attack the ball with his long arms to help him be more of a red zone threat as well. But I do think he'll be worth watching next year if he adds that weight on and looks to be more of a finished product. Speaking of needing to put on some weight, my 13th best tight end, Eli Stowers, will need to do so at 225 pounds. Stowers is underweight due to previously being a quarterback who was converted to tight end in college, but despite the weight and the position change, he's looked good as a receiver. He has good hands, ball tracking skills, and good body adjustments that have been able to give him a good catch radius. He's also a really great athlete and has been able to be great with the ball in his hands after the catch. My biggest critique for him is just, again, feeling like he's a year too early. Outside needing putting weight on, he just isn't there as a blocker and is a major liability, so much that teams are basically just using him as a big slot. Also, he still needs to get used to clearing contact during his route, especially at his size, since that can slow him down. While I don't think it would be a good idea for him to declare for the draft this year, he could be a very interesting prospect next year. Next, number 12, I have Jack Velling from Michigan State. Velling was someone who I wasn't that high on compared to others going into this year, feeling like he had good traits but wasn't delivering on them. Unfortunately, I haven't quite seen anything to feel that this isn't still the case from this year. He's still a really good athlete, but he still hasn't proven that he can be a reliable playmaker, as he still struggles to separate since his route running hasn't taken the next step, and he also hasn't improved as a blocker. I'd hope the continuity of staying with his head coach and quarterback would help his progression, but unfortunately he's been pretty stagnant from last year. That being said, he hasn't regressed from what I've seen, which does bode well if he can finally make those adjustments for next year. Next, number 11, I have Jake Briningstool from Clemson. Briningstool is someone I was a fan of in the summer, and I was hoping he would take a big jump this year. With the way Klubnik's been playing better, I was hoping that he'd be able to lead Briningstool to being more productive as well, but that just hasn't really been the case. I was hoping he would get more experience working down the field as well, but he's still mostly working as a short, intermediate target for Klubnik. I still think he has the potential and lets him do more damage down the field, but it would have been nice to see it more in practice in the games. But I do want to give him credit for making improvements as a blocker. It's still not great by any means, but the improvements are nice to see and something they can hopefully continue to build on. With his hands also still being good and having a big catch radius, I do think he'll still be a solid receiving threat for a team, but I would like to see more of a clear picture of what his ceiling could be in college rather than hopeful projecting. That being said, while he is dropping in my rank compared to my summer rankings, he is more steady than anything and is more dropping due to others rising. Getting to our top 10, at number 10 I have Max Klare from Purdue. That's right, Purdue fans, your season might be a mess, but I want to give some credit to an offensive player for your team. Klare has been an under-the-radar prospect this season who I really like and would be higher if it wasn't such a deep tight end class. Statistically, he isn't that impressive due to Purdue's offense being a mess like I mentioned, which, to be honest, I can't really judge as a Badgers fan, but I do want to pour some salt into the wounds of one of the only teams in the Big Ten with the worst offense than Wisconsin. But if you do put Klare's numbers in perspective of how the offense is performing, he's accounted for nearly a third of the team's receiving yards and touchdowns. Those are both very high marks across the class and show the impact that he's able to have despite the struggling offense. He does have some shaky hands at times, but does a good job attacking the ball, and honestly I think his drop issues are more related to ball tracking issues, since I noticed a number of times when he seemed to leave his feet early or unnecessarily, or had the ball sneak up on him, which is often a sign of the tracking being the issue. Regardless, he is a very capable receiver and a solid route runner despite the limited route tree that Purdue lets him run. He does a good job clearing contact as well, but could improve the efficiency in his cuts to take his route running to the next level. Also, while he isn't the best blocker, he does give good effort and does a good job getting square with his target and isn't afraid to throw his body at a defender. There's a lot to like about Klare, but with Purdue not being able to showcase him and him still being a younger prospect, I assume he'll return to school for another year and maybe transfer out. If he does decide to clear though, he could be an interesting sleeper to watch. Another big riser for me is my number 9 tight end, Justin Joly from North Carolina State. Joly has been another tight end who's been going way under the radar this year. He's an interesting prospect converting from receiver to tight end his freshman year at UConn, and now going up another level of difficulty by going to the ACC this season. Despite that, he's looked really great, with great hands, has looked like one of the best tight ends in the class at high pointing the ball, and has been great in yak situations causing defenders to slide off of him. There's a lot to like about him, and it's always fun to see a prospect not only rising up to a more difficult situation, but also just rising up draft boards. What I do think limits his ceiling is his size. He's listed at 6'3", 235 pounds, which makes him a bit undersized for the position. Now, there isn't much he can do about his height, obviously, but if he adds a bit more weight, he could make himself a more viable blocker, which could help a long way. I think if he does declare for the NFL draft this year, it'll be difficult for him to be ready for the challenge like he was when he transferred to North Carolina State. So I think he's another player who could benefit from returning to school for another year to bulk up and be even more ready to hit the ground running when he goes to the NFL. So if he does return to school, be sure not to miss him on any of your early rankings and boards for 2026. Next, number 8, I have Lachey from Iowa. If you're just checking box scores since either you didn't have time to watch the Iowa games or just don't like watching a team run the ball all game, Lachey's placement here is probably a bit confusing. Just 24 receptions for 209 yards and no touchdowns is pretty bad even if we're factoring in the time that he missed for the past 2 games. But when you break it down, his stats are a lot less alarming. You'll find that Lachey has contributed about 18.8% of his team's passing yards and 22.9% of his team's completions for the season, which are much more standard marks when comparing across the draft class. It's just that Iowa basically has no passing offense, so it's just hard for Lachey to stand out. In the limited opportunities he has gone, he's shown good hands and yak ability, being able to go through defenders. I've mentioned before, but I do think that he can look like he has his feet stuck in quicksand sometimes, which creates separation issues, so that's still my biggest concern about him right now. Also, I would like to see his blocking improve, as it isn't up to the standard Iowa level, but he has the frame and effort to get there eventually. He'll need to get there as a blocker since he's a throwback inline tight end, but I think he has the versatility and ability to contribute more as a receiver if he actually goes to an offense that's willing to throw more than 21 times per game, and if he can prove himself as a consistent separator in the NFL. Next, number 7, I have Terrance Ferguson from Oregon. Ferguson is a player that could be all over people's rankings and boards. If you value versatility like I do, he'll be high up. If you look for players with elite traits or specific traits, whether it's receiving or blocking, he'll likely be lower. Ferguson is a classic jack of all trades, master of none, both in ability and where he can play in an offense. That'll definitely be enticing to NFL teams since they can plug and play him whenever and wherever they need him. That alone could get him drafted over players who could be viewed as more talented players. I consider having Ferguson in my top 5 and actually picked a comp of Kate On, so I feel On perfectly encapsulates the type of player that Ferguson can be. Someone who can earn the trust of a coaching staff thanks to his safe hands, though I will admit his recent string of drops has dampened that a bit, but his quality blocking and being able to play all over will be really nice for an NFL team. Just like On, he may have a quiet start to his career, but he should be able to step up if injuries do arise. So while Ferguson may not excite a fan base if he's drafted by their team, I think they'll soon become fans of his and the consistency that he can provide to an offense. At number 6, I have Gunnar Helm from Texas. Helm put himself on the map early in the season when he put up nearly 100 yards and a touchdown against Michigan. He hasn't kept up that production all season, but he's still been one of the team's most consistent pass catchers. He has very reliable hands and does a good job stretching out to make the catch. He also shows some really nice awareness for finding open space, which helps him to be a safety net for viewers in the short areas of the field, but he also does a good job identifying where to work his route deep down the field in openings. His route tree could be a bit lacking though, as it seems to be primarily comprised of a lot of short patterns to be that safety net, but the awareness of space and decent cuts that gives him some upside as a route runner in the future. He'll likely need to develop his route running to help more than just flat routes in the NFL, since he seems like a good, not great athlete. Also, his blocking is still a work in progress, which isn't ideal since he's primarily an inline tight end, but the effort is there, which again is the biggest thing I look for. All in all, Helm has been really good risers so far this year, and someone who may not be a huge contributor, but is capable of helping an NFL team. Whether he can continue to develop and take another step when he enters the NFL will determine how big of an impact that can be. Getting to our top 5, at number 5 I have Oronde Gadsden, the second from Syracuse. Gadsden was someone I had very low in my summer rankings, despite liking him as a player, due to trying to account for the change in position that he would need to make and not knowing how he would look as a true tight end. Well, this year we finally get to see it, and it's been very exciting. He is still great at attacking the ball, makes tough adjustments to poor throws, and has tough hands to routinely finish catches in the middle of the field. I think the most impressive thing I've seen from him is that he's actually been holding up pretty decently in the run game. It definitely isn't perfect, but it is about as good as I can expect for a player transitioning to a new position, and it makes him a non-liability in the run game. It's just so hard for defenses to stop Gadsden, and it's part of why he's been putting up some impressive numbers. If he lines up inside, he's too fast for linebackers, and he's gotten better at deflecting contact with his hands to help him stay clean. And if he lines up in the slot, he's just too big and strong for corners. I do wish that he worked inside a bit more, as his snaps in line have been lower these past few weeks, but I'm hoping that will bounce back the other way in the final few weeks of the season, since he'll need every rep to get ready for the NFL. I put myself in a tough spot trying to figure out a comp that makes sense for Gadsden, that isn't too lofty, but is also appropriate given his size and circumstance. Due to all this, I end up comping him to Mike Gesicki. Like Gesicki, Gadsden will be a receiver-first tight end, but can be a mismatched weapon thanks to his size and speed. Both have great hands and adjustment abilities to give a great catch radius and be a safe target in the NFL. Both do have a little bit of stiffness that at times will stop them from being an elite receiving threat for a team, but both should be good parts of an offense. Either way, I could see Gadsden being a valuable mismatch piece for an offense if given the opportunity like Gesicki has for most of his career. Next, at number 4, I have Mason Taylor from LSU. Taylor's been a really big riser for me thanks to potentially having some of the best hands in the tight end class. You can always find him attacking the ball with his arms extended and securing the catch despite taking a big hit. He's such a valuable safety net, and it's easy to see why he's become one of Nussmeier's favorite targets. On top of that, he's a really good blocker, which helps him stand out in this class full of receiver-first tight ends. He's most likely the best blocker in this group, and that could help him rise on teams' draft boards, and is a big reason why he's all the way up to number 4 for me. His great size and versatility also help bring him up since he has true NFL size that should translate as he transitions to the NFL. What stops him from being higher is that even though he has NFL size, I'm not confident that he has great NFL athleticism. He comes off a bit stiff in his routes and after the catch, which limits his ceiling and overall limits his ability to separate. He's been able to overcome this in college, but there's no guarantee that he'll be able to consistently separate in the NFL. Great athleticism isn't a requirement, as a number of tight ends has still gone on to have good careers in spite of this, but it is a good indicator of how much they can help in the receiving game. Due to both being stiff athletes with less than great athleticism, I have Kole as Taylor's comp. Both have great hands that can extend for balls, but aren't overly dynamic separators or yak players. However, both can contribute all over the field and provide quality blocking and hands when needed. Like Komet, Taylor likely won't be the most productive receiver, but will still turn into a reliable option for a quarterback like he's become for Nussmeier. Next, number 3, I have Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. Fannin has been possibly the biggest riser of this entire draft class. Honestly, he single-handedly made me start watching Bowling Green games this year, and probably did for a few number of people, so if nothing else, that deserves some credit. He has awesome athleticism that holds up against better competition, and just isn't him beating up on lesser athletes. His speed and balance also make him a yak monster, as he can race away from defenders and survive hits from weaker defenders. He also has great ball tracking skills and good hands to make him an even more dangerous threat. While he is a little bit undersized at 230 pounds, he actually isn't that bad of a blocker and blocks with good effort, good leverage, and generally good hand placement. Also, he's not too bad of a route runner. He makes really good cuts for a tight end that help him use his explosiveness to create separation, and while I have seen some people mention that his stats are boosted by his involvement in the screen game, he looked plenty capable in his deep passing opportunities and routes. He definitely can improve his nuance to his route running to add some deception, and also work to maintain his balance a little bit better, since some of the tougher and bigger defenders can throw him off his path, but there's still a lot to like. I just worry if he's still a little bit too small to hold up in the NFL, and if his route running is ready to be able to help an NFL offense. I think he could be in need of a bit of a redshirt year, or just a very deliberate plan to help him succeed in the NFL early in his career. Due to both being really fun athletes with a lot of upside despite being a bit undersized and coming from a smaller school and needing some development, I have Delanie Walker's at Fannin's comp. Walker is even a little bit smaller than Fannin, but I see both as developmental tight ends with great athleticism, yak ability, and ball skills. Walker is able to get some time to develop as he adjusts to the NFL, and that led him to have a very productive second half of his career. With Fannin having better size and hopefully being a little bit further along than Walker, I don't think he'll need as slow of a start as Walker needed, but I still think it would be wise for an NFL team not to rush him into being a regular starter. At number 2, I have Colston Loveland from Michigan. Loveland is a number of people's top tight end in this class, and I can't blame anyone for having him there. He has great hands and is a very good blocker. He's also a lot more versatile of a tight end than you would expect from Michigan, playing nearly half of his snaps from the slot. With that versatility, he's also able to run a full route tree and does a great job attacking the ball consistently with strong hands and extending his arms to give himself a big catch radius. When he isn't going out for routes, he can help inline, but also has a lot of experience as a move tight end, and his assignment and technique sound with cleanly picking up his block. There's just not a whole lot that he can't handle, which is really exciting. Now, while he can do everything, there are still a few areas that he falls a little short in. While he has good athleticism, his separation is inconsistent at times due to him still rounding his cuts and his routes. Also, he can pick up a fair amount of yards once he catches a ball, but isn't really trucking through players or racing past them to be a yak monster. With the versatility, great catch radius, good blocking, and inconsistent separation issues, I have Kyle Rudolph as Loveland's comp. Like Rudolph, Loveland will be able to jump into a starting lineup for an NFL team on day one. Whether it's being asked to help as a blocker or in the receiving game, he'll be able to contribute and should to get the coach's trust early in his career. Like Rudolph, I'm not certain Loveland will be a big producer in the NFL, but he could really thrive in the red zone and should have a long career as an important player to an offense like Rudolph was throughout his career. Finally, at number 1, I have Tyler Warren from Penn State. Warren was someone I was high on going into the season, but I couldn't justify having him too high since his hands were all over the place, and honestly he had some extremely ugly drops last year. This year his hands have been incredible with just 1 drop on 72 targets, and he now looks like a complete tight end and a future big-time difference maker for an NFL team. He is a classic Penn State tight end who has great athleticism, but he also pairs that with great route running with good cuts, hip sync, and good deception to his routes to create easy separation. He's also incredibly versatile, getting snaps in line, in the slot, out wide, at running back, and even at quarterback. He's such a special chess piece that can fit any role and could really take off if he's paired with a creative offensive coordinator in the NFL or goes to a team that has a clear idea of a role for him. Now, he's not perfect. His blocking has taken a little bit of a step back this year after being impressive last year, but since he has past evidence of good blocking, and I think this is likely adjusting to his increased role this year with Theo Johnson leaving, I'm willing to give him a pass. Other than that, there's just so much to like at his size, athleticism, and versatility that'll give so much potential at the next level. Due to both having a lot of potential, a lot of versatility, and even due to both entering the NFL at older ages, I have Dallas Goedert as Warren's comp. That comp might feel a little bit uninspiring after everything I just said about Warren, but I'm very high on Goedert, and I think he's one of the most underrated players in the NFL. He's not getting wildcat opportunities like Warren, but both are extremely versatile to be able to play all over the formation, have good strength and athleticism to be good yak weapons, and are both very capable receivers. Both can also be very capable blockers to help keep on the field on every single play. Like Goedert, I think Warren will have a long, productive career and could have even more of an impact in the NFL if he goes to a less congested place than Goedert did. And that concludes the tight ends and the midseason scouting series. I hope you all enjoyed this series, and I hope you really enjoyed this part. I, for some reason, have a really sweet spot for tight ends, and I think it's always fun to scout position since I think it's so overlooked until it gets much closer to draft day. I'd like to think that this is a pretty comprehensive list, but please let me know in the comments if there's any players you're higher on, or who you think I'm too high on, or if there's even any players that you think I missed that you would recommend checking out. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to get a start on my QB charting and get ready to hopefully start posting my final 2025 QB evaluations and draft profiles in December. To be sure you don't miss any of that or any future content, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the video too, as it'll help the channel and this community. Also, as usual, if you want just a written form of the basics of the rankings, you can again subscribe to my Substack. But thank you all, and see you all next time.